Hello, welcome to On Wildlife. I'm your host, Alex Ray. On this podcast, we bring the wild to you. We take you on a journey into the life of a different animal every week, and I guarantee you're going to come out of here knowing more about your favorite animal than you did before. The animal that we're talking about this week is one that you've probably heard before. They also have one of the most interesting life cycles on the planet and can emerge in huge swarms. Now, because of this, they're not always seen in the best light. But once you hear from our guest, Dr. Gene Kritsky, I think you'll really start to love these amazing creatures. So you might want to invest in some earplugs, because we're going to be learning about cicadas. There are over 3,000 species of cicadas in the world, and they can be found on every continent except for Antarctica. They're insects that are closely related to aphids and leafhoppers. Most species grow to be around 1 or 2 inches long, and these animals like to drink the sap from trees and different plants. Now, cicadas can either be classified as annual or periodical, and this refers to their life cycle. Cicadas live part of their lives underground. Annual cicadas usually spend around 2 years underground, but there are individuals that emerge every year. Periodical cicadas, on the other hand, are a little more interesting. They can be either 13-year or 17-year cicadas. That means that these periodical cicadas only emerge every 13 or 17 years. The reasons behind this are really cool, and we're going to get to that in just a little bit. And to give us a whole lot of awesome information about these animals, I want to introduce you to Dr. Gene Kritsky. He's a professor of biology at Mount St. Joseph University. He's written or edited 10 books, and he's been studying cicadas for a really long time. Let's hear about how he got interested in cicadas.
Well, it's a pretty easy story. Well, first of all, I'm from North Dakota. I grew up with 5 heroes in my life. My dad, Roger Maris, who beat Babe Ruth's home run record with 61 home runs in 1961, the way you're supposed to with hot dogs and beer. And Lewis and Clark, I knew from a small age that they were 2 different people. And of course, Theodore Roosevelt, who made the comment that if it wasn't for his experience in the Western North Dakota, he would never have been president of the United States. And so that's a fundamental background to myself. And I've been working on cicadas since 1974 was my first project. That was a minor one, but my first big one was the mapping of Brood 23's emergence in Illinois in 1976, 2 years later. I had the good fortune of having both as my advisor for my undergraduate career at Indiana University, Bloomington, Frank Young, who was just one of the most incredible individuals I've ever met in my life. Other than my father, he had the greatest influence on my life. Here was a man who in his 50s loved going to work every day. And I was like, wow. And he was U.S. Army Medical Reserve. This was 1971. I had long hair, anti-war, and we hit it off like you wouldn't believe. It was amazing. And I did a research project with him. I was his undergraduate teaching intern with him. And he was the one who, in the second week of my entomology class, started talking about periodical cicadas. And I freaked out. I was born in 1953, which is the cicada brood 10 year. But North Dakota, we didn't have any cicadas, periodical cicadas, that is. And then in 1970, I was in high school in Illinois, and the brood that occurred there was brood 13. They didn't emerge. So I didn't experience those first 2 emergences being a cicada baby. But Frank was just amazing in this. And so I finished my undergraduate degree with him and then went to the University of Illinois, where I worked with Lewis Stannard Jr., and he was the Illinois cicada specialist. Ironically, I didn't do my PhD thesis on cicadas at all, but I got caught up in other things. I did the cicada project for Brood 23. I got really caught up in a big thing on Egyptology and spent about 3 months of my PhD thesis time just in the library, pulling every book off the shelf at the University of Illinois Library, which is probably the largest university library now in the country. It's 14 million volumes, and it's a repository library. And I just sat there on the floor in front of the Egyptology stacks, moving slowly down, pulling everything off, looking for anything related to insects.
And as I said earlier, Gene is a biology professor at Mount St. Joseph University. He's done a lot of research there with cicadas.
And I came here in part because we had a really nice history of cicadas here. I say this not in jest. There were three things that drove me to Cincinnati. One, trilobite fossils. I love fossils. I teach a course in dinosaur biology, for example, in addition to my other loves. I collected fossils when I was a kid in North Dakota and Montana. I love that. Major League Baseball was here. So that was it. And then periodical cicadas. There were two established broods in the area. And being here since 1983, I'm lucky. I look at everybody in the greater Cincinnati area, the Cincinnati and northern, southeastern Indiana and northern Kentucky as part of my lab team. The Brood 10 emerged about 4 years after I'd been here. And I had hundreds of people calling my cicada hotline to tell me where they were seeing the cicadas. Even got a few obscene calls once in a while, but that's par for the course. And then Brood 14, our second brood that I was expecting, came out in 1991, and that was great.
He told me about a really interesting lab he did with his students as well.
I decided to have them read a paper by Monty Lloyd and Joanne White. Monty Lloyd was an incredible individual, one of the great cicada researchers from the late 20th century, died around 20 years ago now. The paper in there, what he did, and he and Joanne White did, was they went out and dug up cicada nymphs at different times and found a growth difference between 13 and 17-year cicadas. There's two life cycles of cicadas, 13-year cicadas and 17-year cicadas. And so I had the students read this paper, and I said, now, if we're going to go out and dig up cicadas today at the orchard, we had a small apple orchard at the university, at the college at the time. We didn't become a university until a few years later. I said, at what stage would they be in? 4 years. And to make it really dramatic, I want you to put your prediction on a piece of paper, throw it in a note card. I want you to put that in an envelope, seal it, and sign the seal. And then we went to the grounds maintenance shed, and we got shovels, went to the orchard, and we dug up cicadas. And they were bigger than they were supposed to be. Now, in that paper, Monty Lloyd said, it turns out the difference that we're talking about is that 13-year cicadas grow faster in the first 5 years of life underground than do 17-year cicadas. And he and Joanne actually said in the paper, if they should grow faster or molt one extra time that first 5 years, they should come out after 13 years, 4 years ahead of schedule. So here it is, 1991. Brood 10 was expected to emerge in 2004. So if Monty Lloyd was right, they should come out in the year 2000. I had 9 years to wait. And telling kids in 1991, the cicadas are going to come out in 9 years is like saying, don't smoke, you might get cancer. It didn't resonate. But every year in my entomology class, and that alternates with my evolution class, I'd go to evolution. We'd always go back to the orchard and we'd dig up cicadas and we're monitoring them. And so in the fall of 1999, I presented a paper at the Entomological Society of America predicting that we would have a 4-year early emergence of periodical cicadas. And then we just had to wait. And they came out like you wouldn't believe. Not just a little straggler here and there. They came out, I remember they started singing. I received a phone call on my answering machine from some woman. I won't divulge her name, but she said, why are all the cicadas in my front yard? So I had two students working with me. So I thought, well, let's go out and see what's going on. And by golly, they were all in her front yard. They were massive. They were hanging on the shrubbery, the trees. They were singing. They were laying eggs. That was the first time that we had documented a 4-year acceleration that was actually reproducing. I got photographs of them in mating and went back the next day. Her yard they were down a few houses down away. This whole chorusing center was moving down the block. It was like, it blew me away.
Gene started noticing that groups of cicadas were coming out years before they were supposed to, and he started to discover why that was the case.
It was Monty Lloyd who asked, when I told him about all this, he asked if we could do a little experiment for him. So my wife and I flew to North Carolina, and actually we drove to North Carolina, and we found mating pairs of brood 6 cicadas, which that's the established brood that's for that year. And we brought them back. It was really quite amazing. I started dissecting. We started doing all sorts of things. We dissected. I took out the spermatheca, the little packet that holds the sperm in the female, and it was filled with germinating fungal spores. And Monty made the comment, he said, well, that's not surprising because normally if you want to see what's going on now with those that are emerging 4 years early, because they should have fewer. And so I only found 2 spores in one female. All the rest were clean. And that suggests, now more work needs to be done on this, but that's anecdotal evidence to suggest that by shifting by 4 years, they got out of sync with the fungal spore, with the fungal disease. Evolution's happening right in our own backyard, right here.
That's so amazing that we can see this happening. Cicadas are also known for their extremely loud calls. Let's learn about that when we come back from the break. The science word that I want to talk to you about today is flagellum. A flagellum is a structure usually found in a single-celled organism. It kind of looks like a tail, and this tail-like structure helps these organisms move around in their environment. Okay, welcome back. So how do cicadas make those loud calls?
Well, the noise is the call of the cicada is made by the males. The males have a structure called the tymbal, which is it's this membrane lined with chitinous ribs that muscles, when they contract, cause those ribs to buckle and makes a little popping sound. And they do that hundreds of times a second. And then their abdomen is hollow, so it serves as a resonating chamber. And so one male can really put out the noise as he sings. Now, the female does not have a tymbal, so she can't sing, but she does respond to the male when he sings by flicking her wings. The whole purpose of the singing, of course, is it's for sex. And what happens is males will gather, not one or two here, but they gather in periodical cicadas, gather in chorusing centers in trees. And I've had the pleasure. My wife and I just bought a new house a couple of years ago. We bought it in part because we knew we had a lot of cicadas here. We actually inspected the trees. You can go back on the branches and see where the egg nests are. And I'm happy. I'm tickled to say that the second loudest chorusing I found in Greater Cincinnati occurred in my backyard. It's just gotta love it. So a male flies into the trees. Once they emerge and transform into an adult, they take about 5 more days to harden up and harden up their cuticle before they start singing. They'll start singing. One male will hear another male say, he'll fly into that same tree, more and more flying, so it gets louder and louder. And then as they sing, if there's a nearby female, she'll flick her wings. If he hears that, he'll turn, sing again. If she's responsive, she'll flick her wing again. They get closer. He'll sing a different song, move closer still, and then eventually starts a sort of rhythmic sound as he's tapping her with his foreleg and starts mating. If the male doesn't hear a female, he might sing again, or he also might fly to another branch. There was one afternoon, they've got a second story deck off the bedroom, and I set up a camera and it was recording sounds, and it was right at canopy level. So I was like 20 feet away from the very top of these trees. And they're all on the top, and you hear them sing. And if for one pulse, a whole bunch would fly out, others would come in. And that chorus is not a solid, just constant. You'll see it sort of get really loud, and it drops and loud and drops. And it drops when the males start flying to other branches to see if the luck is better at the tree across the street.
That must be so cool to watch. Also, many times you'll see a cicada's exoskeleton just hanging out on a tree without a cicada inside of it. What does that tell us?
They emerge from the ground when the soil temperature reaches around 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And you give it a nice soaking rain, not a downpour like we've had a few days here, but enough of a rain that softens the ground, and they start coming out in big numbers. And in many cases, you might, I'm out there walking around in the night anyway, looking for these things. But a lot of people will wake up the next morning and see the whole yard covered with these little exuviae, the empty shells, the cast exoskeletons of their last immature stage. And there's a lot of biology that can be studied with those things. You can identify the sex, you can identify the species. It turns out there are 3 species of 17-year cicadas, all emerging simultaneously, not necessarily in the exact same spot, but in many cases you'll easily find 2. Sometimes I've found 3 at one location. But the numbers you'll see right away. The first emergence, more are males than females. After about 3-4 days, and they come by equal in number. And then after about 5-7 days, you'll find a few more females coming out, because that's a 50-50 sex ratio, but more come out in the beginning than later. And that's beneficial for the population because males aren't laying eggs. And so and part of their survival strategy is to literally overwhelm their predators to the point where they get tired of eating cicadas and there's still millions left. I do it. Well, if you think about it, I use the analogy. Just imagine walking outside, and this is a plug for Hershey's Kisses, walking outside and finding the world inundated with flying Hershey's Kisses. If you're like me, you'd want to eat a few of these things, and you can get tired about eating chocolate after a while. And for a bird, how many? Our stomachs are pretty good size in comparison. A bird, one cicada is going to fill a little crop up right away. So it's not like they're going to be munching constantly. They will eat maybe a couple of them a day, but that's still pretty rough.
Well, that's one way to avoid getting eaten. And I wondered if that had anything to do with the fact that they come out after either 13 years or 17 years.
There's a lot of discussion. I'm involved with some research projects on that as well. A leading hypothesis that's been proposed for many years is that 13 and 17 years being prime numbers means that it's going to be very difficult for a predator to become synchronized with periodical cicadas. Because how do you evolve that strategy to be synchronized if you're going to be doing 3 intermediate steps? And so it's going to be either 1 or 17. And that's obviously been very difficult. The cicada killer wasps, which come out here usually around here, they come out in early July. The periodical cicadas are already done. There may be an overlap of a day or two, but most of these cicada killer wasps are going to go after the annual cicadas.
Their predator avoiding strategies are so unique to any other animal that I've talked about on the podcast. But how do they know when to come out from under the ground?
No, I think there's a good sense of genetics involved with this to a certain degree. There seems to be some one of the things I talk about in my book, Periodical Cicadas, the Brood 10 edition, published by the Ohio Biological Survey, is that it seems like there's a gene or some kind of genetic switch that turns on a 4-year growth pattern. So if you want to summarize their life cycle, it's n times 4 plus 1. So if that gene is triggered, if it is a gene, it's triggered 3 times. 3 times 4 is 12 plus 1 is 13. If it's triggered 4 times, it's 4 plus 1 is 17. And if it's triggered 5 times, it's 20 plus 1, 21. And I have now have documented this now in 2020 with Cicada Safari. We had cicadas come out 4 years early. We had Brood 13 come out in North Chicago 4 years ahead of schedule. We had Brood 10 in good numbers. That was expected. Had a few Brood 5 come out 4 years late. Interesting. And so I think I may have misplaced. I said in 2020, we had 4-year early Brood 13. We had on time Brood 9, not Brood 10, and then 4-year late Brood 5. But what really blew me away was the number of Brood 19 cicadas that came out 4 years early. That's a 13-year cicada that came out after 9 years. So if that switch triggered twice, that's 8 plus 1 is 9. So there's a pattern here that's consistent. And we see these 4-year accelerations. 4-year decelerations are relatively rare and don't really do much as far as the numbers are involved. But we've now documented this with 13-year cicadas as well.
It's just insane how that all works. Cicadas are also indicator species, meaning that they can give us information about the health of the ecosystems that they live in.
Back in 1902, the USDA in one of their publications talked about the possibility that Brood 10 would be going extinct. They really made a big deal of it in 1919. In part because of deforestation. And we have had broods go extinct. Brood 11 went extinct. The last time we had Brood 11 was in 1937. It went extinct in 1954. We've not seen a Brood 11 cicada, which is one of the things I'm hoping that your listeners will help us with this year. This summer coming up, we are launching Cicada Safari with a search for stragglers. And there's a 2-pronged thing. We want to let people who are listening to your podcast up in the Massachusetts area. That's where Brood 11 was very common and prominent. And I've got firsthand accounts from 1699 and 1716 talking about how loud the cicadas were, and all the deforestation that was usually around. That was southwest of the Boston area where that happened, and they dwindled throughout the 19th century and then disappeared in the 20th. And the question is, are he still there? We had people have looked again in 54, and they looked again in 71. But again, you can't cover everything. And so with Cicada Safari, we had 200,000 people download our app last year. It'll be up again for searching for stragglers this year. We're hoping that some of these people will say, hey, there's cicadas here, and let us know. We've never tried to monitor stragglers like this before. And so that's something I'm hoping that your listeners will help us do.
So if you're from that area, make sure you check out the app. It's almost impossible for only a handful of scientists to be able to survey that large of an area without our help. And that's just a great way to get involved. Cicadas are also really important to the ecosystems that they live in.
Well, they do a lot of good for the environment, and they'll take it through a whole emergence cycle during one of the big 17 or 13-year forms. They emerge in the spring when the soil temperature is 64 degrees Fahrenheit. And as they emerge, they become this opportunistic food source for all sorts of things. Mice, rats, raccoons, birds galore, mammals. I've seen chipmunks and squirrels eat these things. I wouldn't be surprised if deer don't eat these things if they find one. These are herbivores we're looking at. They're eating these things. So all sorts of opportunistic feeders. That actually helps in some cases restore populations. We saw there's some anecdotal evidence to suggest that was found in parts of Indiana when we had a disease that was infecting some of our birds of our predator birds of prey, and that disease lowered the populations, but we had a cicada emergence, so that meant there was more mice the following year, and so the fledglings would have more food sources. That may have contributed to their bounce back of the population. So they come out of the ground. The holes they leave behind is like a natural aeration. In the hot summer months when it rains, instead of all that water just rolling off the dry, hard, baked clay soil, there's holes there, so it get down into the roots around there. So that's beneficial. The egg laying by the female will sometimes cause that branch to break. We call that flagging, and it looks ugly, sort of like brown leaves and whatever. That is like a natural pruning, which turns out to increase the flower set the following year. So that's beneficial for the trees. When the cicadas die, they tend to drop and gather at the base of trees where they give it some nice rain and warm, hot summer temperatures. It really stinks to high heaven. And all those nutrients go back into the ground. And studies have now found that creates this wonderful nutrient cache around the tree, which is going to be helping to sustain the cicadas not only in the future, but also help the tree as well. Even the state of Indiana and Ohio now have been studying the body weights of turkeys taken during turkey season in the year after a cicada emerges, because it turns out the body weight's a little bit larger, heavier in the areas where the cicadas emerged.
Wow, they help the ecosystems in so many different ways, some of which I never even thought about. Now, what else can the average person do to support cicadas?
Plant deciduous trees in your yard. That's a beneficial. If you put a tree, let's say on the southwest corner of your house, that shade will actually help lower your heating bill and your cooling bill during the year. Create habitat for them. One of the biggest problems we're seeing right now with cicadas, and there are parts of Indiana that had big populations a century ago that are now nearly devoid of cicadas, is the going in and subsequent clear cutting of trees. So we need to restore more habitat for periodical cicadas as well. And that adds to your property value. As I say, depending on where you put the trees, can actually lower your heating and cooling bills. So that can help benefit the cicadas and you.
Absolutely. And I want to thank Gene again for taking the time to come onto the podcast. There are few people that are as passionate about their work as he is. And I hope this helped you become less grossed out by cicadas and more fascinated by them and thankful that they're around. I know I came away from this interview with a much greater appreciation for them. And if you're interested in helping cicadas, you should definitely look into downloading the Cicada Safari app that Gene mentioned earlier. You should also check out American Forests and Eden Reforestation Projects, which both help to improve the habitats of cicadas. Thank you so much for coming on this adventure with me as we explored the world of cicadas. You can find the sources that we used for this podcast and links to organizations that we reference at onwildlife.org. You can also email us with any questions at onwildlife.podcast@gmail.com. And you can follow us on Instagram at @on_wildlife or on TikTok at @onwildlife. And don't forget to tune in next Wednesday for another awesome episode. And that's On Wildlife.
been listening to On Wildlife with Alex Ray. On Wildlife provides general educational information on various topics as a public service, which should not be construed as professional, financial, real estate, tax, or legal advice. These are our personal opinions only. Please refer to our full disclaimer policy on our website for full details.